The spooky times have cometh. It's the perfect time to count down my top 10 games for my favorite horror-themed franchise, Castlevania. This long-running series has a ton of great games, but only the best of the best will make it on the list. From Belmonts to Morrises, the series itself covers more than one genre, one of which it helped to create. I love both the Metroidvania-style games as well as the classic Vanias, so there won't be a massive preference when it comes to the genre of the games. Please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to help build the channel. Now let's begin.
Number 10.
Castlevania Curse of Darkness was the fourth game in the franchise to attempt things in a 3D environment. The Castlevania games on the N64 were pretty awful, and Lament of Innocence was just super bland. So how would they do in their fourth attempt? Curse of Darkness on the PS2 is the best 3D Castlevania game ever made. The game controls really well, has tons of action that you feel fully in control of, has great stage and monster design, and includes a monster taming and raising mechanic that is really well done. Curse of Darkness just feels so much fun to play, unlike all the other 3D games in the series. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate Lords of Shadow. It had an amazing story, but it just played so clunky and slow compared to the more arcadey control and movement that Curse of Darkness has. You play as Hector, who has to stop Isaac the evil Forge Master, who is attempting to resurrect Dracula. The game is a direct sequel to Castlevania III Dracula's Curse, to the point where you actually meet up with Trevor Belmont on more than one occasion. This game has so much replayability in all of its weapon crafting, devil forging and raising, and bonus boss fights. Finally, a 3D Castlevania game that I love. You can even replay the entire game as Trevor Belmont from Castlevania III after you've beaten it. Curse of Darkness earns its spot at number 10.
Number 9.
Castlevania 3 is the best of the NES Castlevania games. It took everything that worked in both Castlevania 1 and 2 and added to it. One of the most impressive games on the console, Dracula's Curse is a prequel to the original Castlevania game, where you play as Trevor Belmont, Simon's great-great-grandfather. Trevor would become the first Belmont to ever defeat Dracula, bringing the Belmont clan name into infamy. The gameplay in Castlevania 3 is quite similar to that of the first game, but everything's a bit more fine-tuned, and now you have different paths you can take through the castle, which lead to different allies you can bring on your journey and actually play as. Each character has their own unique playstyle and means of attacking. Each route is almost like choosing your difficulty. The easiest is the route to get Sypha, Grant Dynasties is the normal route, with Alucard's being the most difficult by quite a bit. This is the first appearance of Dracula's son Alucard, who went on to have massive success in some of the later games. For being the pinnacle of the series on the NES and telling a great story using great characters and great gameplay, Castlevania 3 stands strong at number 9.
Number 8.
Number 8 is a game I didn't actually play until about a year or so ago on my Twitch channel. Super Castlevania 4 ended up being one of my favorite Super NES games of all time. It's essentially an expanded remake of the original Castlevania. You play as Simon Belmont, and you've got to journey to Dracula's castle, then traverse the castle itself before facing off with the King of Darkness himself. The game had great stage designs, really fun boss fights, and made the Vampire Killer Whip a lot handier to use as well. Now you can whip in multiple directions, use the Limp Whip for whatever that's used for, but most importantly you can use it to grab on and hang or swing from things, allowing you to get across gaps or even alter the perspective of the stage itself. I really did enjoy this game, but I found it to control really stiff compared to a lot of the better games in the series. Like, come on, Simon Belmont walks like he just pinched off a loaf in his shorts, and what the heck's wrong with his back? Dude needs to see a physiotherapist for that lurchy ass back of his. Other than the stiffness, Castlevania 4 is a very good retelling of the original game. I also found this to be one of the easiest classic Vania style games. So if you've never played a Castlevania game, or you've only played the more modern Metroidvania games and are looking to experiment with the classics, this is the one I'd recommend checking out first.
Number 7.
Some may consider this a weird choice, but Harmony of Despair is a game I've spent too many nights to count playing with friends. Harmony of Despair takes multiple locations, characters, power-ups, abilities, and villains from the entire series up to this point, and puts them into a massive online co-op experience. I just love getting a group of friends together either online or in person and spending hours and hours trying to grind for upgraded loot and even power level any newcomers. Sure, there's not a whole lot of stages to choose from, but the stages are all gigantic, with one of the DLC stages literally allowing you to play through the entirety of the original Castlevania game co-op with friends. I have so many great memories playing this game, and it's still a game I love to go back to, so of course it deserves its spot at number 7 on the list.
Number 6.
The sequel to Aria of Sorrow, Dawn of Sorrow continues the story of Soma and involves a new threat, some crazy cult that wants to resurrect and possibly harness the powers of Dracula for themselves. The game has incredible gameplay, a great story, and expands upon the soul system from Aria of Sorrow by allowing you to gain more souls in order to level them up. Dawn of Sorrow is a really well done sequel to a game that really didn't need a sequel, but it's great to interact with old characters and new to tell its fantastic story and find out how everyone puts a stop to Dracula once and for all. Like a lot of the other games in the franchise, Dawn of Sorrow lets you play through it as an alternate character after beating it, which adds a ton of replay value. The game also has a few different endings, which gives you a reason to figure out what you've done wrong and make things right. All in all, Dawn of Sorrow is an incredible entry in the series, but just doesn't bring enough originality to rank it higher than the number 6 spot.
Number 5.
Up until recently, Rondo of Blood was one of the hardest games in the franchise to get your hands on here in the West, and that's a damn shame. Rondo of Blood was the next evolution of the series, but it came out on the PC Engine, or TurboGrafx 16, a console that didn't do well in North America at all. Which is why Rondo was never released here until about a decade and a half later on the PSP. In Rondo of Blood, you play as Richter Belmont, easily the most acrobatic and well-trained member of the Belmont clan up to this point. Richter had a ton of new moves and abilities that would allow him to traverse Dracula's castle, and similar to Castlevania 3, there were once again multiple different paths you could take through it. Throughout your journey, you'll also rescue people who have been locked up in the castle, one of which you can actually play as once unlocked. Maria Renard is a young girl who is so overpowered, she's basically the easy mode for this game. She uses multiple different animals who fight for her as her weapons, allowing some great long-ranged attacks, some of which clear out the entire area in front of her. She also has a rolling attack, which allows for much quicker movement. Rondo of Blood tells a great story with its state-of-the-art, fully animated cutscenes, and has some of the best gameplay the series has to offer, which is a big part of why it sits so high up here at number 5.
Number 4.
My favorite classic Vania-style game and second favorite Genesis game of all time, Castlevania Bloodlines is an absolute classic. To me, Bloodlines was the combination of everything that made all the previous games in the series good, but expanded upon. It's got that great world tour feel to it as well, since the game has you journeying around Europe on your quest to take down Dracula. I love how you've got the two different characters to choose from right from the start, both with their own small differences, which leads to you taking alternate paths through some of the stages, adding some great replay value. My favorite character, Eric Lecard, is still my favorite character in the entire franchise, which is pretty impressive for a little Genesis game in a series that's jam-packed with great characters. John Morris is the son of Quincy Morris from Bram Stoker's Dracula, which ties the novel into the canon of the long-running Castlevania series. John's this buff dude from, Texas? Who can wield the vampire killer, since the Morris clan is an offshoot from the original Belmont clan. On top of the incredibly well-designed stages and great characters is the plot and setting of Bloodlines. I'm a big fan of World War I and II history, and similar to how the Metal Gear series does a great job of secretly intertwining the events of its games with real-life history, Bloodlines villain Elizabeth Bartley was actually involved in the Prince of Austria's assassination that started off World War I. You see, Elizabeth Bartley is actually Dracula's niece, and in order to revive her uncle, she needed enough bloodshed as sacrifice. The best way to do this was to set off the First World War. From gameplay, to the characters, to the boss fights, to the backstory, Castlevania Bloodlines truly is the greatest classic Vania-style game in the franchise, which is why it sits up here in the number 4 position.
Number 3.
Rondo of Blood was the first big evolution of the franchise, but the biggest evolution would come in Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn. Considered by most as the greatest game in the franchise, it's hard to disagree. In fact, up until I went ahead and streamed my way through the entire series, I also considered Symphony of the Night to be the best. This game was the pinnacle of the Metroidvania genre for years, and is the framework that most modern games in the genre are built upon. The story in this game was unlike any other up to this point. You play as Alucard, who has to take down his father Dracula in the wake of Richter Belmont's failure. The game takes place in a massive castle with tons of different areas to explore and secrets to find. The boss fights in this game also took a huge leap in badassery. Now you've got bosses that are much larger than the entire screen, and boss arenas that cover multiple different floors. Let's not forget how incredibly tight the gameplay is in this game. Part action platformer and part JRPG, this game has tons of great enemies and weapons for you to use against them. Until you get the broken ass Chrysogrim, there's no wrong way to build your character either, encouraging customization based on your personal preference and playstyle. Once you get the extremely overpowered Chrysogrim, or Valmonway as it's called in the newer games, the game becomes super broken. You can take down any enemy in a matter of seconds. As someone who loves finding ways to break games, this was just another feather in the hat for Symphony of the Night. So there you have it, one of the greatest Castlevania games of all time is also one of the greatest games of all time. How could anything top it? Well, there are two games that I played more recently that just barely edge it out.
Number 2.
How do you top Symphony of the Night? Well, first you take everything great from Symphony of the Night, add in tag team character gameplay with co-op multiplayer, and spoiler alert, have the game be a direct fucking sequel to Castlevania Bloodlines! That's right, kids, Castlevania Portrait of Ruin is like some crazy 2D action platforming Metroidvania version of Super Mario 64, starring John Morris's grandson, Jonathan Morris, and his best friend and sorceress, Charlotte Ullin. In Portrait of Ruin, you've got to take on the vampire artist Browner and his followers while learning about the history of how the vampire killer is able to be wielded by the Morris family, and much, much more. I'd go as far as to say Portrait of Ruin has the best story in the entire franchise by quite a bit. The story is so great, in fact, that I can't say much more about it without dropping some massive spoiler bombs. So if you're a fan of Bloodlines, or have even just played Bloodlines before, you really owe it to yourself to play this masterpiece. But Dookie, why did you mention Mario 64? Well, as much as I despise Mario 64, its idea of having huge worlds inside of paintings is very well utilized in Portrait of Ruin. Each of Browner's different paintings lead to a different stage which is filled with new upgrades, abilities, and gear. Some of which can be done in whichever order you choose, but encourage revisiting since you'll unlock an ability that'll allow you access to areas you couldn't get to before. All in all, Portrait of Ruin is very close to being the greatest game in this amazing franchise, but there's just one more game that manages to eclipse it.
Number 1.
Here we are, the greatest Castlevania game ever made, Aria of Sorrow for the Game Boy Advance. Aria of Sorrow took what worked with previous entries in the franchise and evolved them. Now you're playing as the reincarnation of Dracula himself. Aria of Sorrow is like the final evolution the series made, and it made the transition so well. You've got great stage design here, the best in the franchise, a really good story that tells how Dracula is defeated once and for all, and most importantly, one of the most likable cast of characters the series has to offer. The game has you playing as a high school student, Soma, in the year 2035 when a solar eclipse occurs, resurrecting Dracula's castle, which has been sealed inside for over 35 years by the last remaining members of the Belmont clan. The game tells a great story and has a really good ending to the Castlevania saga. Even its unneeded sequel, Dawn of Sorrow, was a great game, which is why it was featured earlier in the video. Honestly, there's nothing I dislike about this game. I loved grinding on enemies to get their souls to drop, exploring the gigantic map, using all the different souls I found, and fighting all the great bosses. Aria of Sorrow is just the perfect end of the Castlevania story. I can't think of a better way they could have ended things plot-wise, and I'm so glad they made such a great game to end the story in. Just think, they could have waited and made some awful game tell the final tale of this long-running series. For making the perfect Castlevania game and capping the story off perfectly, no other game could have taken the #1 position to me. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to click those like and subscribe buttons. Also be sure to ring the notification bell so YouTube doesn't bury my shit on you. You can also hang out with me on my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/dookie03, where I mainly play JRPGs and I'm just wrapping up the Castlevania series on my weekend morning streams. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the honorable mentions here, because this really is an incredible series where you should play pretty much every game. I guess some that get overlooked that are great would be Circle of the Moon on the Game Boy Advance. This game had you using cards for your special powers and abilities, which you could combine with other cards to give you new abilities as well. I loved getting a new card and pairing it up with all the other cards I had to find out what new abilities I'd gain access to. The castle design and story were really good as well. Lastly, I'd like to mention both Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest and Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge. Simon's Quest on the NES has been re-released in the Castlevania Anniversary Collection on most modern consoles. It was originally considered the black sheep of the franchise, but was a big part of creating the Metroidvania genre, and all the bullshit that held the NES version back has been more or less fixed in its re-release, so be sure to check it out. Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge on the Game Boy is also a part of the Anniversary Collection, and has some mediocre gameplay, but in my opinion has the best soundtrack on the original Game Boy. Like, holy shit, this soundtrack is impressive. It also has a feature borrowed from the Mega Man games where you can actually select the order of the stages you play. It was a huge step up from the original Game Boy Castlevania game in my opinion, and is just a great game in the series that is underplayed. Thanks a lot for watching this video, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.